Yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad actually to be back in Lahore, at least virtually. I lived for 2 years in Lahore and for 2 years in Islamabad, and I have very fond memories of this time, and I'm therefore grateful that Altaf Khan invited me to this workshop, and I hope I can make an interesting contribution. It is actually rather spontaneous that I chose to speak on Habermas and social media. When Altaf contacted me, I was just reading about the new book that was produced by Habermas, this dealing with social media. And can you see my presentation? Is it visible? Very good. Okay, and that itself is an interesting fact, because Jürgen Habermas, you might know him, or at least heard of his name, is one of the leading German philosophers, and he was born in 1929. So he has a very grand oeuvre of work, and he's already in his mid-90s, and so it's in itself quite interesting that he still contributes to these discussion, and also had a look at the social media. I chose to speak about it because I think whatever we might have discussed already about the challenges of social media, Habermas analyzes points out the long lines, so to say, in these discussions, because his main work, which actually made him famous in Germany, is a book that was called The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, an inquiry into a category of bourgeois society, that was already published in 1962. And if we are looking at his new book, that so far is not translated into English, it's called A New Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere and Deliberative Politics, that has just come out. There's already 60 years between these two books. So Habermas in many ways is an authority on the relationship between the public sphere and democratic politics, that he usually calls deliberative politics, which basically means that it is a politics where citizens come together and deal with politics in a discursive way. So that means they are discussing about politics, and they try to find the best solutions in a dialogue that should be free of violence. So at least is Habermas' idea. I would like to give you a short introduction into this theory of Habermas of the public sphere, and also his assessment of what the development of social media means for democratic politics, and also for the public sphere. So the first question that we need to answer is, what is the public sphere? Because this is central to Habermas' theory. The public sphere began, according to Habermas, and I think this is something that we can discuss later, how relevant this is actually to other parts of the world, to South Asia. Of course, Habermas' original book from 1962 is very Eurocentric, and one needs to ask the question how relevant this can be for other geographies as well. I think it can be an interesting discussion. So in Europe, the public sphere began evolving during the Renaissance in Western Europe, partly brought on by merchants who needed accurate information about distant markets, as well as by the growth of democracy and individual liberty and popular sovereignty. The public sphere was a place between private individuals and government authorities, in which people could meet and have critical debates about public matters. This distinction between the private and the government is characteristic for the development of a public sphere. Such discussions, according to Habermas, served as a counterweight to political authority and happened physically in face-to-face meetings in coffee houses, cafes, public squares, as well as in the media, in letters, books, drama, and art. What is relevant, of course, for this is that the invention of the printing press was crucial for the development of a public sphere, and this is why this whole development was brought about after it was actually possible to print books and also newspapers for the first time. If some of you have watched, and who has not watched, the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, I think there one could see very well how the authorities, the monarchy, before this development in the Renaissance, used to project itself to the public without having the possibility of a printing press and media. So you saw this grandiose spectacle of the funeral of the Queen, and nowadays, of course, everybody can see it on television, and BBC kept on reporting about it for 2 weeks. But you could also see that this was a projection of power that did not belong to our age. It was necessary in a time when people didn't have access to media, where events like this were actually transferred from mouth to mouth, and you needed to have a grandiose representation of the power in order to make this event felt in the rest of the empire. So this kind of power projections was not necessary anymore. The public sphere developed through the invention of the printing press, and in private circles, at least, because at that time most of the European countries obviously were not democratic yet, but in private circles, discussions based on books, on newspapers, and so on, allowed for discussions amongst citizens. And Habermas still sees a vibrant public sphere as a positive force, keeping authorities within bounds, lest their rulings be ridiculed, but that's not the only aspect. Of course, having a larger part of the people discuss about politics in itself is a precondition in many ways for democracy. So now we come to the centerpiece of Habermas' first work, the transformation of the public sphere, and at that time, when he wrote this book in 1962, he saw two major transformations of the public sphere. And the first transition occurred in England, France, the United States, and Germany over the course of 150 or so years, starting from the late 17th century. Monarchical societies which made no distinction between state and society or between public and private, and which had themselves organized themselves politically around symbolic representation and status. This is what I meant when I was speaking about the Queen's funeral. These feudal societies were now in the first transformation transformed into bourgeois liberal constitutional orders, which distinguish between the public and the private realms. Further, within the private realm, there was a bourgeois public sphere for rational, critical political debate, which formed a new phenomenon called public opinion. Spearheading this shift was the growth of a literally public sphere in which the bourgeoisie learned to critically reflect upon itself and its role in society. So you had a lot of the so-called philosophy of enlightenment that developed in that time is actually an expression of this development. Where you had people like Kant, Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and so on. Their books were read at least in the circles of those who were able to read and had the time to deal with these kind of things. So this was not yet a society that had mass participation in political processes, but the bourgeoisie became important mainly through their through liberal capitalism that developed at that time, and so they were able and also willing to claim a space also in policy making. So the first major shift occurred alongside the rise of early non-industrial capitalism and the philosophical articulation of political liberalism, such in the thinkers that I just mentioned. The bourgeois political sphere flourished within the early laissez-faire free market, largely pre-industrial capitalist order of liberalism from the late 18th century to the mid-19th century. And then the second transition is from the liberal bourgeois public sphere to modern mass society of the social welfare state. I'm talking about Europe still. Starting in the 1830s, extending from the late 19th centuries to the early 20th centuries, a new constellation of social, cultural, political, and philosophical developments took shape. Hegel's critique of Kant's liberal philosophy anticipated the shift. According to Habermas, and this shift came to a philosophical head in Marx's diagnosis of the contradictions inherent in the liberal constitutional social order. These contradictions, of course, I mean, we don't have the time here to discuss all of this in detail, but you know, the upcoming of heavy industrialization, the alienation of workers, all of this that led to the development of a social welfare state is part of this development. Habermas saw the modified liberalism of Mill and Tocqueville with their ambivalence towards the public sphere as emblematic manifestations of these contradictions. Paralleling this philosophical progression against liberal classical liberalism, where social economic transformation based on industrialization and result was the rise of mass societies characterized by consumer capitalism in the 20th century. Clear demarcations between public and private and between state and society became blurred, something that Habermas sees critical for the development of the public sphere. The bourgeois public sphere was transformed by the increasing reintegration and intertwining of state and society that resulted in the modern welfare state. This shift, according to Habermas, can be seen as part of a larger dialectic in which political changes were made in an attempt to save the liberal constitution order, but had the ultimate effect of destroying the bourgeois public sphere. He highlights the pernicious effects of commercialization and consumerization on the public sphere, to the rise of mass media, public relations, and consumer cultures. He delineates how these developments thwarted rational critical political debate, including political parties functioning in a way that bypassed the public sphere, undermining parliamentary politics. So this is all, of course, a very short summary. Basically, the criticism that Habermas expressed here is very much in line what we also know from other authors of the Frankfurt School that he belonged to, that were very critical of the development of consumerism and the role of mass media in this development was also seen extremely critical. You know, this actually gave way or or prepared for the 1968 students movement in Europe, where people also were extremely critical of large tabloid newspapers, and saw these newspapers as actually nothing but a long arm of capitalism, and within this analysis, media were very often seen as a means of the ruling class of a small group of wealthy people being able to force their opinion onto the masses. So that is the second transformation of the public sphere that Habermas saw. There have been, this book has been criticized for a couple of reasons that that are pertinent, I think. So some critics say that the public sphere is an idealist way of looking at things, and it never existed, only in the sense of excluding many important groups, such as the poor, women, slaves, migrants, and criminals. They maintain that the public sphere remains an idealized conception, very not much different from the regulative ideas that Kant suggested, and but Habermas actually insisted that the modernity and the idea of a public sphere where citizens come together and discuss politics, not only discuss politics, but also are being able to influence politics, is part of what he has always called the unfinished project of modernity. And the project would be, well, it's probably a project that is never really finished, but it would be finished in the moment when actually everybody seriously has a say in politics and the way how the state is run. Similar critics regarding the exclusivity of the bourgeois public sphere have been made by feminist and post-colonial authors. I have put here from a recent book by Martin Selinger and Sebastian Sevignani. I have put together here a little synopsis that you can have a look at. I don't want to make this too long, actually. Maybe you look at it yourself. You see the two different transformations of the public sphere. Electronic mass media generalize the potentials of communicated action, but hierarchize public communication. That is what I just mentioned. The criticism here is that there's very little change, because the people who are controlling the media still are a part of the leading classes, whereas during the first transformation, when you had the bourgeois public sphere, that very often consisted of private circles, discussion circles, literary circles, smaller media. There seemed to be more room for, as Habermas says, enlightened discussions, but that is something that yeah, needs to be discussed if that is that was really the case. I also have put up here another synopsis, and now we are coming to the third structural transformation of the public sphere that was brought about by the internet and the social media. And obviously a lot has been already written, and I'm sure that you have already discussed this in your workshop. What was brought about by the social media. So we have three aspects here: digitalization, commodification, and globalization. Globalization, obviously, and otherwise you and me, we wouldn't not be able to speak now, as I sit in Ethiopia and you sit in Pakistan, and which has obviously a big potential, but it also remains, as all of these developments, within the sphere of an elite, and very few people here in the country where I sit and in the country where you sit can actually participate in such an event. So it's a tendency to broaden the spectrum of participants, transnational or even global rational discourse. But the question is, what positive effects does it actually have in the end when we look at democratization? The commodification, of course, is probably the most critical part, and Shoshana Schoff has written a whole book about it. So this is probably nothing that is particularly original in Habermas, but obviously the internet and the possibilities that it brings with it also comes with the growth of large companies. We know them all: Google, Meta, and so on, who can actually, through algorithms, control the discourses that seem to be free in platforms, in the various platforms in the beginning, but are probably not that free anymore, although there have been and still are public movements like Occupy, many others, that were able to make use of these digital media. But so far, I think it is not yet clear what will come about this for democracy. So networking of private opinions, classification or manipulation and differentiation of the spectrum of opinion has happened. At the same time, because everybody can participate, and this seemed to be the original democratic force of social media, a fragmentation has happened. The filter bubbles and the self-chosen bubbles that people participate in the social media have actually seemingly limited the public sphere and have fragmented it up to the point where it seems impossible to speak to people outside one's own bubble. So the consequences here, just to sum a few of them up, the integration of the private and the public through digital media has led to a growing fragmentation rather than increased participation in the real political sense. Paralysis of the public sphere through the libertarian, as Habermas put it, grimace of digital companies ruling the world without meaningful regulation. This led to a digital cacophony and ultimate irrationality, or at least unpredictability. And then the market liberal platformization of Google and others destroys the basis of journalism as a moderator and gatekeeper of political communication. I have put up here one sentence I think that is worth thinking about. The letterpress printing made everyone a potential reader, while digitalization makes everyone a potential author. But how long did it take until all learned to read, asks Habermas, and he also implies that how long will it take until all learn to write, so to say, in the sense that the question is still out how we can harness the democratic potential of the social media that is there as opposed to the adverse effects that I think, see at the moment everywhere, that so far have led not to more democracy, as was the hope in the beginning, but probably to less democracy. And of course, as journalists, we are still very much at the forefront, although sometimes it is even said that journalism probably has reached a dead end. I still don't want to believe in that, but we can probably discuss about it. I have put up here a few questions, but you will probably have even more. Questions for discussion. Is Habermas' notion of the public square relevant outside Europe, and how is it different? I think it is different, and it's worth reflecting about that. Where else does democratic legitimization take place? In Pakistan and in South Asia, but if we are not if not in the public sphere as it is conceived by Habermas. What role do mainstream media still play and can play in the future? And how can social media be used to foster democracy? So this is what I would like to leave you with, and I'm happy to hear your opinions, your questions, and also get into a discussion with you on this.
Hello, Britta. This is Ashrafuddin Pirzada.
Oh, hello, Ashraf.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah. I came to know from your presentation that you stress upon the role of media, and especially social media role in public sphere or involving the people much more in the democratization and its process, if I'm not wrong. So we have some example that in the past, like Orange Revolution, it has been taken place without the media role. So do you think that without media or without social media, democratic values can be strengthened by other means, or something else we can do for that? Because in social media, everyone is claiming their best and they are objecting the other one who are doing for, and everyone is claiming that I'm doing this thing for democratic values strengthening. So what is your take on these, the mainstream media on social media? If we just put out these things from our life, so will the democracy and norms are still be available for us or not? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that is a very important question. I mean, I don't think that whether we have social media or don't have social media is even a question. This is also why I was talking about Habermas today, because I think you can see there are developments in the public sphere that run over a much longer period of time, and the invention of social media is just the latest development. So what we can see is actually a dialectic process where we saw in the beginning, when all these platforms came up, there was a big enthusiasm that this development would lead to more democracy, because everybody, you wouldn't need a publisher anymore to come out with nowadays everybody can put out an ebook, and you can discuss in real time on Twitter and Facebook and where not about political developments. But did this in fact lead to more democracy? I don't know. I would be interested in hearing how these things are developing in Pakistan at the moment. But because if you look at how things have developed in the West, I think the rise of populists, such as one can even call them fascists, such as Donald Trump. In France, you have Marine Le Pen. In Italy, you just had a member of a former fascist party, Giorgia Meloni. She will become the new prime minister. So you have developments that were made possible, probably. What I mean, that is another question: to what extent one needs to blame social media for that, or if it would have happened even without social media, because people are. You also see. A rise of you see more and more people, at least in the West, not being able financially anymore to participate much in social life. So you see a new rise of poverty. So whether this is supported by social media, to what extent this hatred, because basically populism is about politicians who create a dichotomy between us and them. So all of this populism and neo-fascism is based on creating an enemy within, be this foreigners, immigrants. In a way, you mentioned the Ukraine. I mean, also Putin has created, it is a fictional enemy. I mean, there is no fascism in the Ukraine, but he just came up with this in order to pursue his goals. So would all of this be possible without the social media, where this hatred is being flamed on? I doubt that, and the question really is probably, how can we civilize these discourses? And I think this is what Habermas meant. How long will it take until everybody can write? Because the journalists had this gatekeeper function. But before, not everybody could publish everything, but you had journalists who would sit there, and ideally they would adhere to some journalistic ethics, and they would not publish hate speech. They would trying not to be biased, trying to check their facts and so on. You all know that. Everybody knows that in this industry, and this all of a sudden is gone now. So how can we deal with it? I have no answer to this, but I think that is a question that is actually extremely pertinent also for the future of our democracies.
Hello, Britta. Thank you for your detailed answer on the question. I just want to ask you that how would you look at hashtag activism in the light of the public sphere? Because we have had these global movements of Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And in Pakistan too, we have had these movements like Yes, All Men and Not All Men, in the context of domestic abuse and domestic violence. So do you think that social media in the context of public sphere is a platform for meaningful discourse? Or do you think that this is creating more polarization in the society? Thank you.
Well, yes, actually, I mean, this is an excellent question, and I think it's probably the most important question. I would say actually that it is both. The examples that you gave are very good examples for the potential of liberating discourses through social media, and because now this always, I mean, Me Too and Black Lives Matters, that started in the US, and normally it would not be possible to have a local movement like that, spreading all over the world within such a short time. Now it is possible, but that also means if you have progressive causes that can spread very quickly, you can also have hate speech and other anti-democratic movement. These neo-fascists, they are very well connected through social media. Actually, they were among the first who made use of it. So the question really is, I mean, Habermas suggests, and he's not the only one. I mean, the European Union is dealing with this also on a large scale on how to regulate social media. But I think, and then of course, I mean, for example, a country like China is regulating social media very strongly. In Iran, you see the movement at the moment that is going on. The government, of course, tries to curtail social media, but still people are on the street. It is never 100% possible to get this all under control. So even if one had regulations in place that are suggested, for example, by the European Union, that the big platforms such as Facebook and so on need to be held responsible for what they publish, still this is not enough. And I mean, it's not enough to spread hatred. And I mean, there are many cases of people, in Austria. There was recently this doctor who was supporting the vaccination campaign during the COVID epidemic, and she was actually driven into suicide by anti-vaxxers. So all of these things cannot be entirely stopped. And the question is really how we strengthen the forces that can use actually social media for democracy, as opposed to the forces who are using it for their own dark purposes.
Britta, Altafia. So thank you very much for this talk. It was very important in the sense that we talk about the public sphere, but many a times we don't understand what the bases are. But I was thinking about your first question. A public sphere is not so certainly possible, but it is more restricted to the Pakistani urban middle class. It's so because the rural population is still living, as you mentioned, in a feudal, semi-feudal structure, but it is a feudal structure still. And I think it's also a question of how much can you afford to let the tradition go, like, and you can be, how progressive could be you be, like, it's again, that's something that has nothing to do whether you live in a big city or in a small town, but the force of tradition in countries like Pakistan, I think I might be wrong, is too strong to allow a critical public sphere where you can really talk about change. Although it's happening, like you are well aware of many of these movements, if we can call them. So I think it's pretty much there. But the question always remains whether we would be able to make good use of any of the media available. Like if you think of a group of people in a social square, like in a town hall, sitting, discussing the future of the community, they might be wrong too. And as we know in history, many of them were wrong. And elitist movements or elitist opinions were forced upon most of the populations. The same is, I think, happening with the social media. And you see, you give the example of all populist and fascist leaders who are neo-fascist, but then their supporters won't allow you to even speak the word fascist because they don't want negative connotations. So that's also happening. My question to you is basically, and it relates to you also. In fact, like, you have a degree in philosophy, and most of your life you have done journalism. So it's not relevant to what we are talking about right now, but I think it is. So how does basically a training in philosophy help in doing journalism? I'm asking this because when I decided to join DW, and I wrote to my German professor and I said, I am going to join journalism. And he said, you were not trained to do that. Like you were trained in theory. Why are you joining journalism? So that's my question. And also, if you would like to comment on the earlier, where's the time I said.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that that question. What I wanted to say about the public sphere and people in Pakistan who partly live in still feudal conditions and do not have access to this kind of public sphere. You know, what is interesting about the social media is personally that I feel, and of course, I mean, people tend to be very conservative everywhere, I think, in the world, in the villages. What we see is not only in Pakistan, but also in the West, that where people have much more access, that you see as a result of social media campaigning, a backlash. For example, you know, you have this very strong LGBTI movements that have brought about large discussions about, you know, gender identity, the discussion about, you know, whether you could choose your own sex or not. I often read on Facebook these very sad cases of transgenders that are getting killed somewhere in the villages in Pakistan. And, you know, the same thing is happening in Germany as well. Just recently, there was a demonstration for the rights of transgender, and actually one young transgender person was killed. So certain discussions that are taking place on social media and that are pushing for progressive agendas, they meet with resistance from people that are simply not ready to accept this. So I think that is one of the problems, that the tendency that, you know, everybody can actually push for his or her agenda, may it be good or not good, doesn't necessarily mean that societies will accept these demands, and this leads to a polarization, exactly the polarization that we see everywhere now, and here the public sphere then becomes extremely relevant, or at least in a way Habermas would put it, and I personally, you know, I studied in that tradition. Both my professors were actually students of Habermas, and I also had the privilege to listen to him a couple of times. So what we mean when we talk about the public sphere is about societies coming together, discussing the issues, and trying to find compromises and solutions that are not based on emotions, but that are based on discourses, where everybody can bring up his opinion, and then one sits together and decides, okay, this is what we can agree on. So that's of course an ideal that is probably never really reached, but it is out there, and if we talk about democracy, it's probably the only thing that we have if we want to keep democracy, and for many reasons, many of us believe that democracy is still the best out of all forms of governance. So how can we come together as societies under conditions of social media, and you know, I mean, in many ways, this is this now gives us the opportunity that we not only come on the level of a national state together, but we come together on a global level. And I mean, the fantastic thing is that you and me can come together now and discuss these things. Because we are facing so many problems at the moment, starting with climate change, that can only be solved on a global level and not on the level of the national state. So it is needed that we find solutions, although I don't have them at the moment, and probably nobody else has. So then about your personal questions, Altaf, you know, I think. I mean, it's a personal decision whether one wants to go for a career in academia or not. I decided at one point in time that I enjoy journalism quite a lot. But what my training in philosophy brought for me is actually a clarity about the ideas that are behind what we are doing, and I personally think that journalism plays a very important role for every democracy, and it is a certain kind of journalism that I already mentioned that before, the journalist ethics, the unbiased reporting, the fact-checking, trying to seriously understand what we are reporting about, as opposed to just spreading opinions or pursuing an agenda. The clarity about this and the importance of this for democracy is actually what supported is how the study of philosophy supported my my career in journalism.
So I'm going to ask another one. Like, this is going to be the last one. Like, you mentioned the unfinished business of modernity, as Habermas calls it. Like, I think when he said it, it was in the 1962 book, and he recently also talks about it. So I think, as you mentioned, 60 years between both the books, and so my question would be, with globalization and all these changes going on, when everybody moving from traditional societies into modern and now into mediated societies, how does it seem how do you see where we stand on this unfinished business of modernity? Like, many people think that we have already lost the positive vibes of modernity, and we are going into kind of a state where we might not seem physically or structurally primitive, but most of these trends are re-emerging with populism, extremism, and hatred getting global, and all of these things. But we would still love to hope that the unfinished business is not going to end up badly. So I just wanted to have your opinion on that one.
Yes, indeed. I think this is a very important question. When modernity is a movement that was based on rationality, and in the Habermasian sense, on deliberations based on rationality and an interactive discourse. So I mean, that is, so to say, the main point in Habermas philosophy, that the rationality is not conceived as in Kant still just as a human faculty, but rationality is actually developed in an interactive discourse with others. Um, um, if that is the case, and if we look at the current crises, I think keeping up this unfinished project of modernity is actually crucial for our survival. What we see at the moment is definitely a backlash on all levels. Especially we in Europe at the moment. I think we are all quite shocked about the fact that we again now have a major war on our continent, something that we, if we would have asked anybody 5 years ago, we couldn't have really imagined this. So there seems to be a falling back into patterns that are not rational at all, and so therefore, I think keeping this project up despite these adversities is actually of utmost importance.
Thank you, Britta. We don't have any more questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Disconnect. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All of us. Bye-bye.